French fashion icon Pierre Cardin has died aged 98 after a very illustrious career where his name became quite synonymous with the brand. The legend was larger than the name. He was the first designer to sell clothing in department stores in the late 1950s before expanding into fragrances, accessories and even food. Earlier, I spoke to the fashion editor for the Australian newspaper, Glynis Traill-Nash, about Pierre Cardin's legacy. Glynis, thanks for coming in and joining us. Pierre Cardin's death was announced overnight from Paris at an enormous age, at 98. A life of extraordinary achievement and quite literally a global household name. What do you best remember about him?
Look, I mean, it's so good to be here. Thanks for having me. Look, he was a giant in the fashion industry, really. 98, great innings by anyone's measure. But I guess there are a couple of things that he is particularly well known for. In terms of fashion signatures, he is one of the names that is synonymous with kind of 60s futurism in terms of that whole space age fashion. So he was doing the kind of little A-line mini dresses in plastic and with the, plastic bubbles and little helmets and things. So he was really synonymous with that. He and Courrèges were the two that were really at the vanguard of all of that. And he did once say that I think he said he designs for the world of tomorrow, the world that doesn't yet exist. So that was, in terms of the fashion, in terms of the style, that was very much the thing that we associate him with most of all. And to be fair, yeah, he was a workaholic. He continued working for years and years, and he opened a shop in Paris a few years ago, and I passed it and I went, really? Wow. And again, it was still riffing off a lot of those 60s silhouettes, but with sort of modern updates. But the other thing that he was kind of best known for, and which actually did to his detriment to a point, which is a shame, was that he became a bit of a pioneer in terms of branding and licensing. So from sort of I think even from the 50s on, actually, he was quite early. He got he had a very recognisable logo, the little sort of rounded P in the kind of corner. Yeah. And throughout the 70s and beyond, you would see it on everything. So it was on cars, it was on sardines, it was on pickles, it was on toilet paper and cigarettes and ashtrays. There was almost, I think he had 800 or 900 licenses for his name and logos. So that did become a bit of a problem because it was on everything. It was no longer aspirational.
And that's, I've got vivid memories of, he made male product lines in the 80s. He diversified. Yeah. Do you know any comparable designer who's had such a span? And that motor vehicle licensing thing, can you tell us a bit about that? Because when I read that in the obituary account today, I was astonished. I knew about the sunglasses, but motor vehicles was one that I thought was a little outside his remit.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, Carl and Zampatti did one in Australia, you remember, in the 80s. So it's something, look, it's an unusual collaboration. People do it from time to time. Big car brands will, partner with a designer, and it's usually on the interiors more than anything else. So it's all the kind of, the finishes on the chairs and the fabrics and that kind of thing, and any little weird details. So it's an odd one, but it does still happen. But yeah, I mean, he was just one of the first to do this. He understood the power of his name and his brand and this idea that he could put his name to anything. And yeah, it did become a problem. It did become a problem.
You think he devalued the currency to some extent, in other words?
Yeah, a little bit. And people would talk about that quite a lot, actually, sort of, 20 years ago. It was kind of like, yeah, well, how relevant is he still when you can buy him on a packet of cigarettes, for example, that sort of thing. Yeah.
And I think he even went into a fragrance line some time ago, and it became very cliched. But you actually attended a fashion show where he was still alive, well, and busy at the age of 96. Can you tell us about that experience?
So that was January 2018. I was in Paris for the couture shows, and Jean-Paul Gaultier, who always does an amazing show, it's always filled with an amazing front row and all the rest. And he actually did a show which was an homage to Pierre Cardin. And so even the folder, which I still have somewhere, is like a sort of 60s op art kind of black and white swirl design. And there is always that moment at these big shows where the media pounce on someone. They say, oh, this is who's in the front row. And everyone kind of clamours around. And so I was kind of in my seat going, okay, who's that? Who is it? And this kind of small white-haired man with glasses but sparkly eyes was about 5 feet away from me. I went, oh, wow, that... Everyone's just like, oh, c'est Pierre Cardin, c'est Pierre Cardin, you know, and everyone was terribly excited because he's, you know, not a common sight these days. But he took it all in and took it in his stride, and he had some nice things to say about the show afterwards to everyone, you know, so... But because Gaultier had started with, his first job was with Pierre Cardin in his studio, so this was his way of kind of, you know, paying homage to him.
And I guess it's a testament to him to have attained that enormous age. But reading today, some of the enormous names of last century more so than the contemporary era, but gather had a rapport with the Beatles, Lauren Bacall, names that even my parents' generation would recall. So he really was quite a giant, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah. And... you know, he was Jeanne Moreau, the wonderful French actress, was one of his muses. There was sort of talk that they might have been a thing for a while there. But yeah, he was one of the early celebrity dresses kind of designers, you know. There was an interesting thing I read about the Beatles, actually, because he tried to introduce these very slimline suits with the kind of Nehru collar, and they didn't really take off. And then I think the Beatles were actually wearing knockoffs, and so once they were wearing the knockoff version, it was like, well, game on, come on, we're doing this, people. So then he kind of made it his own again.
Sadly, I'm old enough to remember them wearing those suits to Australia in 1964, Glynis. Look, thank you for shedding some light on that legacy, because it's been that kind of a year where a very substantial name that many Australians would be familiar with has passed from among us at a time when deaths become almost blasé on the front pages. So thank you for shedding light on his legacy and taking time from your busy schedule to share a personal recollection of being in his presence.